If a kid who bullied you pick up your book, what do you hope they would learn by the last page?
I still remember his name. I still remember when he hit me on the head with a 2x6 piece of wood. I did my very best to choke him out.
All right, SideQuesters, we are here with author Evan Kidwell. He describes himself as a family man, husband of nearly 10 years, and father of 3 kids aged 7, 4, and 10 months. Before becoming an author, he built a career in the insurance industry. Outside of writing, he enjoys reading, video games, movies, and tackling escape rooms with his wife. As a kid, his books were his refuge from bullying, and that early relationship with storytelling ultimately led him to write his own. I wanted to start with that. I resonate with that a lot, Evan. When I was a kid, and our audience has heard this story numerous times, Stephen King, R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, and a slew of other horror authors were my refuge. Mm-hmm. I experienced bullying from grades 5th through 7th. My home life was chaotic. The only way I could escape that chaos and that bullying was through books. So I want to start off with that question. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I was actually 3 months premature, which meant I was always the smallest kid in every class I was ever in, right? And so I was always behind from that perspective, which made me a very easy target for any kid, really, because when you're the smallest kid, any other kid can exercise their power over you, right? So just about every version of bullying you could imagine, I experienced. The only one I didn't really experience because of my age, I'm 38 now, was I didn't, as a kid, experience cyberbullying as much. But I don't know if I would have preferred that or not. When you're actually getting beat up, that's a very different feeling, right? So
yeah.
So it was not just physical getting beat up. It was mental. It was emotional. It was getting picked on. It was all the different things that you can think of. Getting picked last on every team ever. Like, they were required to pick me. I was definitely not the one that was wanted, right? Like, it was just it was one of those things where, especially as a kid, you don't necessarily know what's wrong with you or why nobody likes you, right? Like, that was really where I was at. And so growing up as a kid, I often would play by myself on the playground. That was so much better than trying to involve myself with the other kids when, I was just going to get picked on anyways. And the way I would do that is I would actually create these characters that I would interact with as a kid on the playground. So, for all intents and purposes, imaginary friends, right? And then when I would go home, I would read books and I would dive deep feet first into books. And I also walked home or rode my bike when I got older. And my school, this was back in the day when that was a normal thing, was a couple miles away from my house. So I had lots of free time on my hand to kind of create these characters and interact with them in that way. And then I would reinforce those characters through my reading. My early influences were, Harry Potter, Animorphs. That was one of my huge all-time favorites. I was the kid that would when I found a book I liked, I would pre-order the book. I'd get it a month before anybody else, and then I'd read it before anybody else. So I already, sometimes I was the kid that would also give spoilers. No, so that was my my experience as a kid. And then as I grew into high school, so I did end up wrestling in high school. So you would imagine as a wrestler, the bullying would stop because now I'm a wrestler, right? And that was actually encouraged to me by my dad. And the problem was the bullying just changed. It wasn't the same as it was, but now the bullies were the wrestling team because I was the smallest kid on the wrestling team, right? So I was 98 pounds as a freshman in high school, and it was so I was literally the smallest kid, and so. By the time I was a senior, some of that had started to phase out, but certainly all the way through until like my junior year of high school, it was from grade school all the way through junior year of high school. It was a pretty constant thing.
Yeah, I definitely resonated with a lot of that. Even the riding the bike to school, walking to school. My school was a quarter mile away, so I walked to school. And there was a comic book store on the way to my apartment and to school. I would stop there. There was a library across the street. I would get lost in books there. And I remember, because I like horror a lot, something you said, I don't know what it was, but it prompted this memory. I remember getting books from the library, and they were like Stephen King, Tom Clancy. They're really adult books sprinkled in with a couple of R.L. Stine books. And one time the librarian is like, does your mom let you read all this? I'm like, oh, this is for her. I'm just doing an errand for my mom. And she was like, good enough for me. You know how the 90s were, right? Like I guess so. And so I that's how I got into horror and adult horror books. So, awesome. But I resonated with a lot of your story. In high school, because it was a 3,000 person high school, the bullying stopped. Mm-hmm. It actually stopped in 8th grade when I kicked my bully's ass. And then people were like, oh, okay, well, the short, weird, skinny kid, maybe we should have messed with him. And then in high school, because I was lost in the crowd, I was able to kind of blossom into myself, whatever the right term is. And then I was friends. And then, you know, I was friends with some of the jocks. I was friends with the dirtballs. I was friends with the theater kids. I kind of had a slew of friends. And because we were all lost in the crowd, all that stopped. But my love for books and stories and never did. And so it's really fun to meet a person with a very similar background.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't think I did myself any favors in high school, though. I was a total nerd. So I was the kid that would play Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon cards during my lunch break with my friends, right? So I don't think I did and I was in theater. So I really don't think I did myself any favors in high school.
I want to ask specifically about your book and the inspiration for it. You had mentioned that there was a dream that you had that inspired the book. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit more about that dream that inspired the book.
Yeah. So I learned a long time ago that I actually keep a dream journal going.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because I have very vivid dreams. I dream like you would watch a movie, right?
Yeah,
and
same.
When I have a dream that really leaves an imprint or an impact on me, I have about 15 seconds after I wake up to remember as much as I could possibly can from the dream. Otherwise, I'll tell my wife, I'll be like, man, I had an amazing dream last night. She'll be like, what was it about? Don't remember. It's gone, right? And so I actually keep a dream journal. And this particular dream was the hierarchy system that sits in my book, which is the whole premise behind my book. It's the bones of my book, right? And so, and my dream was there were powered individuals, and there was a tyrannical style government, and the way they controlled those powered individuals was through this, I call it bloodlines in my book, but was through this hierarchy scale. And basically the idea was that mythical beings of old gave their powers to humans, and then those humans actually progress those powers through their blood, through genetics over time, right? But the tyranny still wants to make sure they maintain control. So the best way to do that is to classify each of those powers and each of those people in a specific way. So that was the premise for it. And it wasn't like I've looked back at that dream journal note. It wasn't exactly what I did in my book, but it was pretty dang close. And there were certain things that I dreamed that I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that, right? Like there were certain tropes that existed in that dream that I was like, that's not what I want for this book. So, but you know what's interesting is going back to the childhood bullying and the characters I would create as a kid. Well, as a kid, all of my characters had powers in some way or another, right? And so I don't know why that always fascinated me. Maybe it was because of the idea behind if you had a power, you could change your situation from the bullying, right? But I'm actually, as I wrote this book, I was actually able to pull some of those same characters that, I mean, I had these whole story arcs built out in my head from when I was a kid. I was able to pull them into my book, or at least do similar things to what I did as a kid. So that was actually a lot of fun. But it started from a dream, but that wasn't the end point. And I don't know if this was another future question or not, but what ended up happening was I actually thought about this dream for about 4 years. And every time I thought, it was like, man, it would be so cool to write this, like turn this into a book. I could see myself reading this book. I like this kind of thing. I've always been fascinated with fantasy. And so and it's always been something I've always said I want to do. You know, like when you have those boards on Pinterest or something like that, it's like, oh, I want to write a book, right? Because I've always thought it would be a cool thing to say, like, oh, I'm an author, right? But I never took any steps towards it. I never took it. It was just something that lived in my head and something that sounded like a really cool idea, right? And then I was at a leadership conference for the world of insurance, and the keynote from stage got up on stage and said, I want everybody to sit down, write down on their piece of paper, not their phones, not their tablets, not their computers, a physical writing on your piece of paper, something that scares you and excites you that you want to accomplish next year. And I thought about it for a second. I was like, man, I would love to write my book. So I did it. I wrote down, write my book. That was for me. And if the next step didn't happen, we wouldn't be talking today, because it was still just lived in my head and been this, ooh, that's a cool idea, right? And so I'm sitting in the front row. I try to be a good student wherever I go, and absorb as much as I can. And he points right at me. He says, you got something on your paper? I said, yep, absolutely. And he goes, okay, great, come up on stage. This is in front of 400 of my peers. This is in front of some of my industry mentors,
Whoa.
right? And
That's really cool.
Yeah, and he goes, so what'd you write on your paper? So I write my book. And he goes, oh, so like a finance book, an insurance book?
Yeah.
No, like a fantasy book. It has nothing to do with this industry at all. So, and so I got off stage, and it was really funny because one of my peers, which was also instrumental to this process, says, you know what this means, right? And I said, what? He says, you can't show up at the same event next year without a book. And I was like,
oof,
dang, you're not wrong.
Mhm.
So it almost forced my hand a little bit. I had now 400 people keeping me accountable. You know, every time I talked to them, they'd ask me, how's your book coming, right? And so here's what I will say. I did do it. So I actually launched the book, self-published the book, and I launched it on Amazon 4 days prior to that same event the next year.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Excellent.
Cutting it close.
Cutting close. Yep, exactly right.
Now, when you shared that with them, did you go, yeah, well, I had a dream? Did you like give any explanation, or you were just like...
So, you know what's so funny is we talked for an hour on stage. It was not as simple as, hey, you want to write a book? My talking with him was his entire presentation. He had a little easel and he'd say, okay, so you want to write a book? Why do you want to write a book? And it started very superficial and surface level. And it was like, I think it'd be cool, right? Like that was my initial gut reaction answer. And he goes, no. You don't just write a book because it'd be cool. You write a book because there's a reason behind it, right? Like if that's the goal, if that's the reason, you're never going to write a book. Like you may as well get off the stage right now and actually, have me talk to somebody else, basically. So he challenged me, and it really came back to that initial question, Slava, which is I got to the fundamental piece of why I wanted to write that book. And that was I was bullied as a child, and I used reading, I used fantasy worlds as my escape. And I want to be able to do that for future generations. But I also I didn't want it to just be an escape. As an adult, one of the things I've learned is just escaping doesn't help either, right? So I actually wanted to create some of the things I've learned along the way, implement them into my book. So kids would have tools to be able to use to actually get themselves out of those same kinds of situations. And so my primary character, Timaeus, in my book, his power is that of resilience. And how do you turn resilience into a power, right? And so his power is actually minor luck, where he actually ends up having lots of bad things happen to him, right? And so it was that we talked for an hour, and it finally landed on, this is why it's important to me. But now that I had the why, right? Now that I understood the meaning behind why this was so important to me, it made me so much more motivated to actually go out there and do it, and not just, oh, it'd be cool, right? So,
and the pressure of 400 people. So, just
minor detail.
But that brings me to a follow-up question. In your email exchange with us, you say the quote, "Don't stay in your trauma." Mm-hmm. How does that message directly live in your story?
Yeah. So that has been really pivotal to my life. What I didn't realize, even as an adult, is I was still holding on to some of that trauma, not just bullying. I'm a product of divorce, right? My parents divorced. That caused a lot of trauma in my life. There's other bad things that I'm not going to talk about on this phone call, right? That happened that shouldn't happen to kids at all, like ever. And so, um, but what I didn't realize is I was still holding on to it. It was like, it was a piece of me in such a way that basically it wouldn't allow me to move forward with my life, right? I still have triggers that exist for me where I just automatically get triggered in certain ways when certain things happen. We were talking about triggers at the beginning of this phone call, right? Like I still have some of those things. And so it took counseling. It took actually going to a counselor and actually uncovering that I still hold on to this. And it's okay that it's a part of your story. Like that's not a problem, but don't live in it. Don't stay in it. Move yourself forward. And so, yes, to answer your question, Slava, there is a significant instances of time where in my book, I have characters dealing with similar emotions and they have a choice. They can stay stuck in it. They can stay in the oppression of it, or they can move forward. And the way I actually have them move forward is they start to create this friendship group that's kind of a core friendship group for each other. But it's a friendship group of friends that probably wouldn't normally be a thing, right? And so they're able to then kind of lean on each other, even though it goes a bit against the norms. And that's also a bit of an Easter egg for what's to come. It goes a bit against the norms because we have powered individuals in there as well as non-powered individuals in there, because my book does have that mechanic. And the non-powered individuals are not supposed to really associate with the powered individuals. They're supposed to kind of do their own thing, right? And they're seen as servants, the lowest of the low, that kind of thing. But that friendship group comes together through these trials. So I have these trials in my book. The trials are designed to break kids open and unlock their powers inside of them so that they can get classed into that hierarchy system faster. And as they're going through these trials, they're learning what's important to them and how do they want to move forward through it, regardless of what the tyranny is saying they're supposed to do. So
I want to ask a follow-up question on that too, because I really liked that concept when I was reading on this site, I think a little bit more about your book. And so I was curious if you felt like, not that the bullying was a good thing, but that these were like trials that you went through as a kid that unlocked like, hidden like powers, if you will, within yourself and discovering yourself more.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a big message in my book about being true to who you are as a person. And the trials, one, it makes for exciting reading because they're intense. They're not just small trials, right? There's jumping off fiery buildings, that kind of stuff in my books, right? And but there are moments, specifically in the second trial, there's a moment where, and I'm not going to give away too much, but my main character realizes he has some inadequacies, right? And he realizes he's trying to still do that thing where you persevere through those inadequacies, but that wasn't the point of the test. That wasn't the point of the trial. The point of the trial was to get him to accept those as a part of who he is, right? And be okay with it and move forward despite that, right? And so, yes, is the answer to your question. I would not wish bullying on anyone. I would not wish half the things that have happened in my life on anyone, right? But they are still part of my story, and they do empower me to bring some real emotion into the writing. And one of the things I will say I didn't even realize was a superpower of mine, right? Because of my bullying, because of my desire to create these characters to escape, right? I have a creative brain that I have never tapped into, right? Really, I mean, in the world of insurance, I don't really have to tap into it. It's just I know these products and right, right. And so I've always leaned towards logic based thinking. I played chess as a kid, right? So I've always leaned into logic. But there's this whole other side of me that's creative that I didn't even realize was, I mean, I in the back of my mind, I knew it was there, but I didn't ever really have a need to tap into it. And so that actually allowed me to learn to even be more creative, even in my own life, right? With other people, and see things for what they are now versus just logic, right? And we only ever think this way. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely was shaped by my own trials growing up as a kid. I wouldn't take them away. I wouldn't advocate for anybody to have them, but they are part of my story, and now I can move forward.
So, question for you. You said you want kids to have the experience of like moving through these things so they're not stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have characters who remain stuck?
I will. Yeah. So there are going to be some characters that, now when I say I will, I already have plans for certain characters to stay stuck in books 2 and 3. I have those mapped out. I just have to now get it out of my head and onto paper. So I'm going to have moments where characters stay stuck. And I'm going to create, there are going to be characters that are going to be what I'll call failed characters. That's intentional by design. Not every character can overcome every obstacle that ever comes their way, right? And so those failed characters will become evident, right? And it'll start to happen, and they'll either fall out of the way everyone's moving forward, or they're going to take different actions. Don't want to give too much away, but no, I definitely. I don't think it's realistic for every character in a fictional world to be able to overcome every obstacle. So we're going to make sure that I want it to feel realistic still to people. So
yeah, will you have like some of the main characters still be friends with people who've chosen not to move forward?
Yeah, so that is definitely happening in book 2. It's I already know exactly the 2 characters it's going to happen with, right? And and the kind of conflict I can create with that. And so, yeah, in book 1, that wasn't necessarily the case because I was just starting out as my foundation. But in book 2, we're definitely going to see some of that for sure.
How large is this series going to be?
Yeah, good question. So as of right now, I think it's going to be about 7 or 8 books. But again, I know the ending. I know what I want to do with the ending of the series, right? I also think it would be cool so there's about 11 things in the hierarchy, power systems in the hierarchy, right? And so it'd be cool to touch on a little bit of each of those in each of the books. And so I don't know if it's going to be as many as like 10, 11, but I could see it at least being 7 based on, what I have planned out in my head. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Something you said, again, really stuck out to me is understanding that what happened to you is evil and bad and shouldn't have happened to any kid, but not wanting to erase it. I can tell you definitively that my experiences as a kid taught me to read the room, right? Like where there's dangerous people about, you can read a room and you can read people better. And that translates to more than just situational awareness. In my life, that has translated into being able to ping somebody who's had a similar experience. Like if somebody even says something, or the way they say something, or their mannerisms, or their reactions to certain things in conversations or in the world, you are able to pick up another fellow trauma survivor, and you're able to minister to them, for lack of a better term. You're able to talk to them in a way where they're like, oh, you understand, you're safe. I'm able to share a little bit more about myself. And because of that, they're able to process their own traumas, their own history, all that, and they're able to see that they're not alone in feeling that way.
Yeah.
And that's been a payoff. Like one of my good friends now, I worked with her at a restaurant, and we just clicked on something. And I was able to provide her with, I don't want to say, it wasn't guidance, but a shoulder to lean on and just bounce ideas back off. And she has a pretty harrowing story herself, and now we're really good friends. And my wife has had similar stories. So when she met my wife, they were able to connect too. And it wasn't trauma bonding; it was just the ability to see, oh, this person has a similar thing that I did. And so even for this alone, although there's been other instances, I wouldn't give up, my experiences for whatever a better life would have been called, because it still defines you, shapes you. I can tap into, again, Jonathan and I are aspiring authors. Neither one of us are published, but I can tap into a creative side because of that too.
Yep.
So, yeah, very cool stuff.
I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing that I recognize that you said there that I want to highlight is it's not about staying in that trauma or trauma bonding or like, exalting the trauma, right? It's about recognizing it existed and using it as a tool to move yourself forward. And so I think that's really important in general, because there are things that people deal with, and it's not okay, but you need to be able to learn how to. And it's, by the way, I say this, and it is easy to say, and I had to do my own to get through it, right? Like I had to revisit that trauma as a child. It's not easy to do, right? It is emotionally draining to do what I'm saying, right? And so please don't hear me and think, oh yeah, he just thinks everyone can move forward through their trauma. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes there is a period of time where you're going to be in it, and it sucks, right?
Yeah.
But I had to do that for myself to be able to move myself forward. And after I've done that, now I can sit there and go, okay, look, it was not healthy for me to stay in it. It was not good for me to stay in it, right? And so, to your point though, it does allow me to have a sense of, like, I can pick out a bully like that. Like, I mean, it is so quick. I can tell. And I can also tell somebody who's been a victim of that kind of behavior, right? Or been a victim of those kinds of things that have happened in my life, right? And so I think it's also important for people to know that if you recognize the opposite version of your trauma, like for me with my bullies, for example, call it out. Like when I see a bully, I say, don't do that. Don't be a bully. It's not nice, right? Right now I have kids. So I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 10-month-old. But my 4-year-old has gotten into that phase of just being mean for mean's sake, just because she's, well, one, she's not the baby anymore, all that kind of stuff. That dynamic all exists. But I call her out on it. I go, hey, don't be a bully. Don't be mean. Like that's not what we're here for, right? And so I think it's important to also, when appropriate, call it out when it's happening. So,
yeah, I'm glad you said that, because on this podcast, when we describe books or discuss them, we often go on these side quests, hence the name, where we talk about life and real life applications. But one thing that we don't do, and I abhor with every fiber of my being, is trite aphorisms. Just pick yourself up at your bootstraps, like
right.
that with a spiked bat. Like, I hate people who use social media or their fame to say that horse shit. I can't stand it.
Yeah.
Because you can challenge somebody to stop, wallowing in their own self-pity,
right,
but you can challenge them in a way that actually propels them and not you sitting there finger wagging at them. So right. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Well, and also I think that you need you need an external force to get you through those things. So as a Christian,
Absolutely.
I would say that's, Christ
Mm-hmm.
getting you through the trauma and transforming it into something that is that moves you forward.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm a Christian as well. It wasn't enough for me to just say, I've given it to God, therefore it's gone. Like I needed external help too. I needed to go through counseling. I needed to, and that actually got prompted by other people noticing how I was reacting. It wasn't even my own decision. It was somebody else, like my wife, pointing out, like, hey, do you know you react in this way? Do you know that that's a problem? Like, do you know that causes friction with our family? Well, and I would defend it and I would justify it and I would go, well, it's, whatever. And my history or whatever. And she's like, yeah, but it's still like, you can't talk to our 7-year-old that way. Right. Like,
yeah.
And so in some ways I was almost becoming the thing I detested. I was becoming a bit of that bully a little bit because that was my triggering and how I would react, like, as an impulse reaction. And so it was more that I needed to seek outside help in addition to Christ in my life. And so I think both are important, and God will put the people around you that are going to be the ones that can help you through it. But it is not a simple thing to just say, okay, I'm going to be done with it, or okay, I give it to Christ, therefore it doesn't exist. I don't think it's as simple as that.
God definitely uses secondary means, and he's not some magical grandpa in the sky. He's like the author of life and reality and
Right.
existence. And to some degree, he is removed for good reasons from this world, but he still governs it, and he does use secondary means to get you through it. Like, as a kid, I read Stephen King, and some Christians would say that was a bad thing. Let's agree with them for the sake of argument. Well, Stephen King, the big bad horror writer who, writes really dark stuff, helped me not kill myself when I was in 7th grade. So,
Right.
Well, what are you going to do with that? Like, that's just black and white facts. That's not just Slava philosophizing or something. That is it.
Right.
Absolutely.
I had a similar conversation actually with my own dad about Harry Potter, because as a kid, that was a big, in the Christian community, that was a big no-no. Like, you don't read that book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my dad actually gave me a great aha moment back when I was a kid. And he said, look, at the end of the day, fiction is fiction, right? It's not real. It's fantasy. If you understand that it's fantasy and it's not real, then fine. Go ahead, read it. I don't care, right? But if you start trying to do these things they do, right, then obviously you think it's real, and that's not okay, right? And so, but that delineation for me was really important as a kid, because then I could just immerse myself in the fantasy and immerse myself in that world and not feel like I was a bad guy for doing so, or for reading a book, or, and so that was really helpful distinction for me growing up as a kid, for sure.
Yeah.
How do we wrestle as Christians for, kind of expanding on that thought? Okay, we've demonized this thing, Harry Potter, right? I remember that. We've demonized, we never, Paul talks about how we should only think on things that are pure, and et cetera, like, right, in scripture. But then you've got Slava, who found, I'll use the word salvation, right, from the horrors of his day-to-day life in someone else discussing the horrors of life.
Right.
So how do we wrestle with that? And let's just start. That's a big question. How do we wrestle with that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, from my own perspective, right, God is going to use circumstances or things to talk to each individual differently. He created us all individually, differently and unique, which means he's going to communicate with us all differently and uniquely based on how we see the world and what we relate to individually. And so I think that is part of the masterpiece that he's created, right? And so I related personally to fantasy books, right? I could have said, oh yeah, nonfiction's for me. I hate nonfiction. I just don't like it, right? Like, I've never related to it. And so for me, the way that I needed to be communicated with, or the way that I needed to be shown that, like, I matter, was through a world of fantasy, right? And all of the tropes as a kid that I grew up with, I started believing them as a kid. Nobody loves me. Why am I here? Right? What is the purpose to this life? What matters? I remember I was actually bullied more in church than I was even in school. I remember getting to a point where I was going, why? Why does it matter? Like, I don't even want to believe in a religion where the people are worse than the individuals at school, right? Like, that makes no sense to me. And like, psychologically, that didn't make sense to me. And I had a friend, which is why the friendship was a big component in my book, who basically loved on me. Just, I care for you as a person, and that's it. That's how I came back to Christ, was because of his mentality of, I don't care what your decisions are, I'm going to just love on you. And I do believe firmly that that's a big way to show the Christian faith, right? Is to love on other people, right? And I remember specifically my escape from, I was in a very dark point in my life, much like Slava. I was wrestling with the emotions of, why am I here? What does this matter? What's the point? Nobody cares for me. Nobody loves me. Nice guys finish last. I've dealt with all of those, right? Right. Nice guys finish last lived with me for a long time because I've always been a nice guy, and I started believing I needed to be something mean and not nice in order to get a girl. Like that was in high school and college. That was like my trope I lived with, right? And so, and I remember specifically the day that all changed for me, and it started with a caring individual who just showed friendship to me, and I was probably very annoying to him. So, thank you, God, for bringing him into my life, right? But he said, "Hey, you should come to church with me." And I asked him, I said, "Why? Why should I come to church with you? I don't like. I've done that train. I've never had a good experience ever, and that's really sad to say about the Christian faith in general. Like,
Yeah.
It's very cliquey in lots of ways. And he goes, well, my church won't treat you like that. I said, I don't believe you. Like, that's just not, I've never experienced that. So I don't believe you. And he goes, they won't. And I said, okay, then I'll give you one time. I'll go one time. And if I even get an instance of feeling that way, I'm out. And I didn't get that from them. And I came back to God. But it took, one, the ability to escape, right? Like the ability to get out of it and not live in it. Two, it took a friend to just come alongside of me and care for me, right? And say, hey, I love on you. Like you are a good person, and reinforcing that you're a good person. I started just believing that I wasn't even a good person. Like nobody wants to hang out with me. Nobody wants to do anything with me. Nobody cares for me. Like that was the, and by the way, as an author, that gets compounded in my head like this. Right? And so, I think if it weren't for my reading, my fiction, fantasy, you call it, it was demonized as a kid. That was my escape. If it weren't for those things, if it weren't for the way I needed to be related to, we'd be, well, one, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Two, I would have been in a very different spot in my life. So I think God uses people and experiences and things, even worldly, right, to relate to and communicate with those of his constituents. He's made all of us different and unique. So that it was probably way more philosophical than you wanted.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I want to jump on all the philosophy and add my little theological cap, put it on, because I've been to seminary for 8 years. So 2 things, or maybe 3 things. Bear with me, guys. We live in God's world. Mm-hmm. We can't escape that. The most ardent atheist, the most churchiest church person, whatever it is, we live in God's world. And artists and content creators and writers and actors, they all grapple with the human condition in whatever fashion they understand it to be, in their worldview. So I think anything can be used for good. Mm-hmm. Even horror, and even contemplating and dissecting darker matters, mm-hmm. and parts of the human condition. Number 2, to Jonathan's question, Paul's writing in a specific historical context, talking about specific theological points. And I think when he says focus on what is good, he doesn't mean never swear and only think about grandma's apple pie when you get angry. He's talking about to aspire to the more beautiful things in life. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those things are secular in the sense that they are stripped of Christian context, the good mm-hmm. Christian and the bad Christian context. So I think when we come to a situation, a discussion like this, there are horror writers, I haven't found one, but I'm sure there are, that write for the sake of writing dark crap. It's gratuitous. Mm-hmm. And you can go, okay, well, you're just being whatever you are. You're being a dick about it, or you're being contemptuous on purpose. Mm-hmm. Or there are writers like Stephen King, I believe, who's writing these things because he's processing his own stories and his own life. A lot of his stories come up from a mundane experience. Like The Mist came about because he was stuck in a grocery store with his son, and he goes like, what if monsters were outside? And he writes a fun story about monsters. And then he grapples with the human condition within that story, within that framework. And so I think all the things you said, Evan, and that was my little, put a period at the end of your sentence, or a little cherry or whatever, is my added words to what you said very eloquently.
I guess one thought that I had as we were talking through this is one thing that a coworker of mine said to me once as we were talking about like similar things growing up or like parenting that we had, in terms of like, oh, I couldn't watch, this different type of content or whatever. My coworker had said to me, who had parents that didn't care at all what he consumed, as a kid. He said, it's really cool that you had parents that cared enough about you, that cared about like what content you were consuming. So like, I do think that there is an aspect of that is important, of like, okay, what are we consuming? And um, yeah, and I guess, yeah, not to like say that, I mean, all of that like backlash against like Harry Potter and those kind of fantasy books were warranted, but like, I don't know, there's just a thought that I had as we were talking through it.
I think it is important as a father to control what my kids are consuming. But I also think there's a token that needs to be mentioned here, because what I care about is how my kids are acting. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'll give you an example, which has nothing to do with like, it was just an example. As my kid, my 7-year-old, who was 4 at the time, he would watch the show PJ Masks. There's nothing wrong with that show, right? So let's just make sure that's very clear. I'm not bashing anybody in any way. There's nothing wrong with that show. However, he started emulating the bad guys. He started acting like the bad guys. He started talking like the bad guys in that show, where because he's very influential. Like he's definitely a follower, right? And so, but he started not being nice to his sister, and he'd be like, you know, and he'd call her names, and it's like, okay, then we cut it out, right? Like, but if that behavior wasn't happening, I would have been fine with it. So I think it's one step further to expound on what you just said. It's about watching for the actions of your children, how they are reacting, how they are acting towards whatever they're consuming, and if they're portraying characteristics that you don't want to reinforce as a Christian man, right? Like, then those are the things you stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been times where I've had to stop YouTube because it's like, I don't like how you're acting. I don't like what's happening with the content that you're consuming, right? So it is important, but there's a difference between creating a bubble that your kid lives in. I lived in a bit of a bubble growing up, right? And creating an environment where they can ask questions, or they can move themselves forward, or they can grow as little people, right? And so I think that's also important to note is, yes, it's important to manage our kids' content, but I think it's more about managing how they're acting, and not just managing it, but like watching, observing, and noticing, okay, these things are not good for you. You're not old enough for that yet, that kind of thing. But certainly there are, even books, like I'll read a book and see if it's a good fit for my kid. And there was one book I read, it was a great book. It was a young adult book, and he's 7, so he's still a little young, but he reads at a 3rd or 4th grade level, right? But in that book, there was monsters, and he has an overactive imagination like I do. And so I go, I don't know if that's the right fit right now, because he would then think that there's monsters in our house, right? And it's like, that's not helpful either. So I think there's definitely it's a balancing act for both of those things. We want our kids to become their own people. We don't want to bubble them to an extent, but we also want to make sure that they're becoming good contributions to society down the road. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to pivot the conversation to the book itself,
okay.
and talk about a little bit about the craft
Yeah.
here in a little bit. But something in your email, you said that, and you remind me who it was, but somebody gave you some major feedback after the launch of your book.
Mm-hmm.
What did they tell you, and how did it change? Anything concrete, a specific example about how you present the book, talk about the book, maybe future writing projects? How did that all affect you or inspire you?
Yeah, so I've actually gotten really good feedback from initial readers from my book. I got some really good feedback along the way by somebody who kind of has that background of creative writing. She actually works in the world of insurance as well. But after the book was launched, I welcome feedback, right? I want to make the next one even better, and so I think the biggest pieces of feedback actually relate to the banners you see behind me. I met another author at a show at the Portland Fan Expo, and her name is Nicola Taihi. She's got a fantastic series out called North Queen. And she was the one that came back and said, hey, your banner's really cool. I had a banner of my book. This is my book, right? So it basically was my book, and it, you know, had a QR code to scan and all that kind of stuff. She goes, your banner's really cool, but nobody knows what it means. She said, do character art, right? Hire an artist, do some character art, make sure your banner says young adult fantasy, right? People should be able to tell from across the room that your book is something they might want to pick up, right? And you know, even my title, right, Timaeus, nobody knows what that means. Well, that was a made up name that I created. That's why nobody knows what it means, right? And so, so that feedback was what produced the banners behind me. And now, from that, I go to shows and I watch people go. They go, "Wow, your art's really cool." I don't even like to read fantasy, and your art's really cool. Or I saw it from across the way and I had to come up and talk to it and see what your book was all about, right? So that was like super helpful from another author standpoint of you could be doing this better. And so I try to take that feedback and implement it when I get it, you know, because I'm a new author. I don't know what I don't know, right? Like there are plenty of things in this space I have no clue about, right? I met my PR person and she said, look, at the end of the day, you need to be getting on podcasts. You need to be getting yourself out there, that kind of stuff. That's how I got connected with you guys, right? And so I'm trying to take the feedback where I can get it. I did have, you know, it was interesting. I had a conversation with an individual and he asked me a question about a character in my book. And he said, was this your intention? Were you trying to do this? Almost like that failed character issue. And no, I wasn't. I know what I'm planning on doing with her in the future. And he goes, yeah, it missed the mark for me for that character in this way. And so now I know, okay, in book 2, I need to emphasize more of her role and not less of it, because I want her to be a foundational piece in my books, right? And so it's stuff like that I've seen, and people have been really fantastic from that feedback. But some of the best feedback I got was actually from my editor. I had an editor who they did a great job. I did what's called hybrid publishing. So I paid somebody a fee, not a small sum of money, right, to do everything from editing to artwork to the map in my book to the, you know, how the text is formatted, all of that kind of stuff. Help me publish it on Amazon. I still own all the rights. I still own all the royalties, all that kind of stuff. But they said, you know, hey, this, so there's this character behind me, to the left of me here, is Professor Undermeyer. He's the bad guy in my book, right? And so I created him as a psychopath. That was my whole intention. He doesn't feel emotions the same way we feel emotions. He, you know, it's easy to paint a psychopath as a bad guy. In my head, at least it was. And I remember there was a point in time where my manuscript was done. It wasn't published yet. And she said, what are his motivations? And my response was, he's a bad guy. He's a psychopath. He has no motivations. That was what I initially told her, right? And she says, no, he absolutely has motivations, right? Every character has motivations for doing the things they want to do, even if it's a skewed version of you know, motivation.
Yep.
And she said, you need to go back and write scenes from his perspective to give his motivations. And so I did. So my manuscript was done, or so I thought, and now I added several chapters of just from his perspective of why he did the things he did, who he was, what he was all about, all that kind of stuff. And it made it a more powerful story. Well, then I actually had it at the very first event I went to last year, 2025 Emerald City Comic Con, right? I had a gentleman who was an English professor who bought it on day 1 on Friday. And it was very kind of him, but he ended up reading the entire book over the 3 days he was there. Okay. And on Sunday, he came back. Yeah, I was like, whoa, that's impressive. Okay. On Sunday,
super fan.
Yeah, super fan. Exactly right. He came back up to me and he said, I hate Professor Undermeyer. He goes, good job. That was what I was after, right? And so those kinds of feedback were instrumental to my writing journey, my writing process, even my psyche behind creating just a character who's a bad guy. It's not as simple as that when you're trying to bring them to life and make them relatable to people. So
that is a big complaint that I have had on the show that I've mentioned to Slava in particular, of books that I've disliked where I'm like, I don't care. I don't know what their motivation is.
Name one book, Jonathan.
China Mayville's City in the City. I'm just trying to make China famous by how much I hate it so people go buy it. Like, props to you, China. No, but I'm like, I don't care about any character for any reason because I don't know what they want. Mm-hmm. But then there's simpler books like Cradle. Cool. Main character, what's he want to do? He wants to level up because he's sick of getting bullied. Great. I know exactly what he wants, and every book, I know exactly what he wants. Fantastic. Hate books that don't tell me, like, what is the character's motivation. Now, if it's, like, revealed later or something like that, fine. But when it's not revealed at all for any reason, specifically bad guys, it's like, cool. Well, this was a waste of my time. Right? Thanks for that. Right. So good on your editor for telling you to go back and go, hey, and also like giving you that lesson instead of having to learn it where you're like, why aren't people buying my books? And then like 2 years in, people are like, oh, well, because this guy has no motivation. And you're like,
oh, well, why would he nice to know?
Yeah. Yeah. But I wanted to go further because you talked about your PR agent, and she is how we got connected. Mm-hmm. What was it like as an author? Okay, so you finished your manuscript. Like, tell us about the journey for after the fact. Like, you've got a manuscript, you're ready to go. You said, did you do it on your own for a while? Did you decide like, nope, I'm going to just put money behind it because I know I want to do this and I want to do it right? Like, what was that like for you? And please don't skimp on the struggle side of it for us, right?
Sure. It was a little bit of everything you just described. First of all, so I launched my book at the very end of 2024. And at the event where I'm announcing, yeah, I launched my book, all that kind of stuff at my leadership event, actually at the event, I had a family member reach out to me who had been dealing with some very traumatic things in their life, right? And what it meant was, so she was being abused, and she basically came back and said, I don't know what to do. And I said, you get out, right? And she goes, I have nowhere to go. And I go, then you come live with us. And that is exactly what happened. It was one of those things where now I have a new person in my home for 9 months. She was with me for 9 months, which meant I was not even able to focus on my book the way I wanted to, right? And so that was its own struggle, right? Then from a like marketing, like she's out of the house and now I'm trying to kind of pick up the pieces from that caused me a lot of my own emotional trauma during that period, which meant I wasn't focusing on my book. I wasn't focusing on the things I needed to be focusing on. Like it was this weird situation, right? And so then I start marketing. And first of all, there's a ton I still don't know to this day from a marketing perspective. I started going to shows. Emerald City Comic Con was the first one I went to, but I only went to that one and maybe one more in 2025, right? So I've been going to a lot more shows in 2026. But what I noticed, and this is just from my own perspective, is what it seemed like was happening was everybody was making money off of my book except me, right? And that's still a little true to this point in the sense that I was getting blasted with, hey, I'll review your book for $70 a pop, right? Everybody wants to review my book for $70 a pop, right? And you know, how do you get to 50,000 reviews, which I don't have, right? I have 30 something, right? But how do you get to 50,000 reviews at $70 a pop? Like that doesn't make any sense. I don't have the money for that, right? And so I started getting blasted with that kind of, you know, hey, I ended up almost getting scammed at one point. Somebody who was a well-known author, I looked them up on Amazon, right? Reached out to me. They're like, I love your book. awesome. Thanks so much. And they're like, hey, have you had trouble marketing? Yes, I have. It's been a struggle. And they go, oh, okay, great. Well, for $500, all these things. And what I found out pretty quickly, I found a site called Writers Beware. This is a common scam for writers. Is they'll get an email from someone who looks authentic and looks real. And the way I was able to determine that it was a scam was I actually said, well, let's jump on a Zoom call together, like we're all doing right here. I wanted to see who I was potentially sending my money to. And it was definitely not the person that was like depicted in their description. And then they would blast me on the back end, both the author and the scammer. It was the same person. Were blasting me. Well, why aren't you working with them? All this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to just throw my money away. That's not my goal. I do want my book to make money. I do want people to learn about my series. I do want to do it right. And so I found my PR person through Instagram, through an ad on Instagram of all things. But I also made sure to look at all of her videos. I didn't just want here's my book. Like, look, you know how many times I've seen somebody just post a book and they're like, this is the book. And it's not like they did a video of it. They didn't, and so it's just generic. It's the same for everything. And so I saw her, she had videos, she had shorts. She literally talked about why it's important to do certain things. And then I was like, you know what? If I am going to put my money towards this and I want to do it right, then I want to go ahead and hire this person for PR purposes, because now I'm going to get the exposure that I want, that I'm after, and she's going to manage to make sure the relationships are the right relationships, it's the right fit, all that kind of stuff. And I also have a full-time job as well, which meant I didn't have the time to do that kind of stuff. So I just needed to pay the person to do it for me. So that was a little bit of the long and the short of like my journey directly after publishing, and even till now of, marketing, the mistakes I've made, almost getting scammed, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Like, and getting back to the craft, because I have some craft questions. Like, because the way I write is I think of a character or something pops into my head and I'm like, all right, so we're going to put this guy, let's say, I'll use my current short story as an example. It's partly autobiographical and there's a lot to choose from. So I took this kid and I put him into, a horrible situation with his mom. And from that's where the story grows. Not because the short story is going to be a very short loop of a story. But if you're writing a novel or a series, like, talk about like how a character maybe pops into your head. So maybe this is an extrapolation of that dream story you said. Maybe it's something else. But talk about how a character comes into your head, you plop them in the world. How do you govern that character? Or does that character kind of take you on a journey somewhere and you follow them along? Or do you already have everything you ever wanted to do to the poor soul inside your mind?
My characters, no, I don't have everything I want to do with them inside my head already. Everything that I want to do with them starts from a big picture perspective. Like, eventually I want this mechanic with them, right? And one of the things I did with my first book was I actually would introduce the interaction. So Timaeus is a bit of a blank slate. There's a reason for that. I did that on purpose, right? So that the reader could learn with Timaeus about the world, right? He was homeschooled. His parents never really introduced him to society at all. They always just trained him to basically become a servant, right? And so he doesn't really know much about this world. He got accepted into this, it's called Mythica High, because his parents are servants to a kind of high bloodline family, right? And so it was just happenstance. And they did that because they were actually hoping he would become their servant as well one day. Like, there was motivations there, right? And so, but what I did is I started by introducing him to one character at a time, and I created their own moments with those individual characters. I didn't just plop him into a group of friends. Like, that's not how, the friendship built organically as my book went. And one of the things, so I'm a bit of a pantser. There's this whole term in the world of authorship of, do you pants or do you outline? Like, the idea of outlining drives me crazy, right? Because you could outline and outline and outline and never actually have something of value, right? And so my mindset is I'd much rather just sit down and write, and kind of write what I'm coming up with or what's coming into my mind, and then move forward from there. Like what is a normal instance where this character might react in this way. And so the characters kind of build as I'm building the story, if that makes sense. And so for me, it was important when I would introduce a new character. Why is that new character important to this storyline? So one of the characters I introduced pretty early on, her name is Denise. She is a quirky tinkerer. Like she just has this quirkiness about her, right? And I got some of that motivation from one of my own siblings, right? I'm not going to say which one, because if they watch this podcast, I don't want to be like, wait, you did that to me, right? So, but I was like, they're quirky, but in a fun way. Like that is just who they are as a person. And so it's like, okay, she doesn't have any powers, but how does she, one of the thoughts I initially had was, how does somebody with no powers, just in general, how does somebody with no powers compete in a world of people with powers and hierarchy? How does that happen? So, Denise creates inventions. She's a tinkerer. She's an inventor. She has no powers, but she uses her brain to like help her overcome situations, right? Ralph, and a lot of these characters have similarities to like my own personality traits. This would be a good personality trait for this character, right? Ralph is the thinker. Like he literally outthinks everything. Sometimes too much, right? so he's the strategist, he's the thinker, right? And so like it was fun to kind of bring these different components in and then create instances where they actually had to start working together on things, even though they didn't necessarily want to. And it organically created that friendship group that I was after in the first place. So, but that all came from kind of a pantsing mentality. Now, book 2, I know broad strokes again what I'm trying to do. I know there's several characters I really need to focus on in book 2 to give the power and the effect that I'm trying to go for what's going to happen at the end of book 2. Right? I know what's going to happen at the end of book 2. I know what's going to happen in book 3, and I know what's going to happen at the end of the series. So now kind of weaving that in such a way that almost creates some of those Easter egg-like moments is what I'm after, because I don't want to give everything away in every interaction either. So,
do you have any more dreams about your world?
Not recently. So,
but yes.
But yeah, so I have. There have been times where, like, specifically when I was in my writing process of book 1, I would have dreams of scenes that would happen or things that would happen, and then I'd wake up and go, "Oh, I've got to add that into my book," or "Oh, that was really cool," or "I really like that, but I want it to be with this other character." So that when the creative process was happening while I was writing, I definitely had more dreams about the world and about the book. Which makes a lot of sense because I'm thinking about it during the day, I'm writing it, right? And so, but I haven't recently. I'm on book 2, and I'm about a chapter into book 2. So, yeah. So that's yeah.
Have you ever dreamed in German?
I have, back when I studied German.
Seriously?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
wow.
This was back when I was relatively fluent. I studied business and I studied German, and that happened by accident, actually, interestingly enough. So in high school, we were required to take 2 years of a language, and I lived in California. So the options were Spanish, French, and German. Okay. And I was like, tried to get into Spanish because that's like the most obvious choice in California, and it was packed. There was no more room in Spanish. So my options were French and German. My sister took French. I was like, I don't want to take French. So, okay, I guess German's my option, right? So I took German for those 2 years. Well, in the third year, I didn't want to necessarily take German again. And they said, oh, but if you go on your third year, you get to do a German exchange like experience with, cool. You go to Germany for 2 weeks and you get a German student to come to your house for 2 weeks. Like, that's a cool deal. Like, do German again. And I was like, okay, fine. That sounds fun. Let's do that, right? And then in my fourth year, it was like, oh, but hey, not only do you get to go to Germany again, but now you get AP credits which count towards college. So that's great. And when you're taking all AP classes and all that kind of stuff, it's like, okay, let's do that. So I did that. And then I get to college and they go, okay, well, you have to take 2 semesters worth of a language. And I said, okay, well, may as well stick with German because I've already been doing it. And then I tested out of like 6 of their classes, right? Or 7 or something like that. Like I tested out of a bunch of their classes and I had credits from the AP class. So they said, well, hey, just a heads up. If you do 18 more credits, which is only like, 6 classes total for my entirety of college. If you do 18 more credits and study abroad for 6 months, you also get a major in German. So it's like, okay, sure. So my biggest mistake in learning German actually was when I went to Germany for 6 months. I went with my roommate in college because he also was a German major, and we spoke English the whole time we were there. Right, that was my biggest mistake. Right, I didn't actually immerse myself in their culture, and so that was, if I could have done that again, I would have done that differently. But at the end of the day, when I was speaking it pretty consistently, I had to take all my classes in German. When I was in Germany, yes, there were times where I dreamed in German. It was rare, but it did happen. So
that's like the test.
Yeah,
right?
But don't ask me to speak German now.
Okay, we won't.
It was the same thing with French. I did that 2-year stint in high school for French. I used to make my Parisian teacher cry with joy as I read the lessons in French. Now, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Sure. Yeah. No, I can
Bonjour
pronounce
now.
it correctly, but I can't speak it or even read most of it at all. So
I'm good about being able to understand what people are saying. Like if someone were having a German conversation, I could pick up on what they're saying. I just wouldn't be able to regurgitate it in any sort of like normal way, like we're conversing now.
yeah.
And the other thing that happens when you're specifically with German, when you go to Germany, not only was my roommate American and we spoke English, but anytime you try to practice your German with Germans, they'd say, yeah, your German's really bad. Just let me practice my English with you. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I studied in the Netherlands for
Okay.
6 months also. I don't speak any Dutch, so don't ask me to speak any Dutch. But I did have grandparents that spoke Dutch, but they only spoke English with us. And when I was there, it was the same experience that anybody that I would try to speak Dutch with would immediately switch to English. They're like, no, it's way easier if we just speak English. And
Yeah.
they speak perfect English.
They do. It's like infuriating.
Mhm. Yeah.
Same
But I
thing
would
to me
enjoy.
when I went to Israel. They're like, "You're Israel. You're nope."
You're Israel, yep.
Same thing happened to me when I went
Hebrew.
to Israel.
The
Your
language is Hebrew.
Thank you, Slava. Your Hebrew is terrible. Let's use English.
Yeah.
But I do look super Dutch. And so in the supermarket, in the store, like people would speak Dutch with me and I would like maybe know a word or two that they said, but I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I can reach up for that for you. But where in Germany did you study?
München. So Munich,
Munich,
basically.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to Munich.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you. If a kid who bullied you
Yeah.
were to pick up your book, what do you hope they would learn by the last page?
You put me on the spot. There's a specific kid who was a consistent bully of mine growing up as a kid. I still remember his name. I still remember what he looks like. I still remember when he hit me on the head with a piece of wood, 2x6 piece of wood in acting class. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
We both got suspended that instance because that was the
course you
final
did.
straw. And the tiny little kid that you said, like 8th grade, that story that happened to me. He hit me on the head
Good.
with a piece of wood, 2x6 piece of wood, and I did my very best to choke him out after that.
Good on you.
So
Absolutely.
I finally had
Fantastic.
Defend yourself.
enough. But gosh, if he picked up the book, I did not like that guy, right? And so if he picked up the book, I would hope that he sees one of my characters that does a lot of the bullying, right? I got my influences from this childhood bully. I would hope that he would see that and go, I hope, like, I didn't realize that I was doing that to him. But again, I don't know if he would even remember, because if, bullies don't necessarily remember every kid they bullied, right? And so I think at the end of the day, as an adult, I would hope he would look at that and go, one, I'm sorry for treating another kid or another person that way. Two, I want to make sure that my own children don't do that moving forward into the future. Would be my hope. So.
So as we wind down here, you're a finalist in the 2026 International Impact Awards for Young Adult Fantasy.
Yes.
So plug that. What does that mean to you? What does all that entail? And please plug away so people can go, vote.
This is one, in the world of authorship, this is one of those awards that's kind of right up there in my perspective with like New York Times bestseller. It is a highly sought after award. The awards ceremony is like an extreme gala. It's not a cheap event to go to. It's kind of like the Oscars of the world of authorship. So the way they do their judging is they do it based off of 50% of content of your book and 40% or 50% of, 60% content in your book and 40% of voting. I don't have a huge social media following, so every little bit will help. But I did become a finalist. So now it's down to the wire of the finalists getting voted on. And yes, thank you. Appreciate it. So I did already win an award. I got silver place for the Reader's Favorite Award for Young Adult Mythology in 2025. But this one would be kind of the carrot on top. Eventually, I would love to become a New York Times bestseller. I think this helps kind of pave that path towards that direction. And I know I can't be New York Times bestseller for my first book because of the way the math works on all of that, but I could be for book 2 or book 3. And so this kind of validates that, brings that forward. And the other thing that I think is really, and I mention at shows, is I do believe, first of all, I wrote my book from a standpoint of would I want to read this book? Like that's where it started, right? If I wouldn't have wanted to read it, I don't want to bring it to other people too. I'm a little biased. I think my book is great, right? But when you win an award or you get nominated as a finalist for one of these massive awards, what it also does, it validates that it's not just me that thinks my book is good. And I really hope that anyone who picks up my book really enjoys it as much as I enjoyed writing it. So.
Very cool. Well, we'll make sure to put it down in the description so people can go and vote for you.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
And buy your book.
Yes, and buy
in
my
that
book,
order.
please.
First go vote for it and then
vote, then buy. Yeah, that's great. That's a good order. Yeah, exactly.
So one final thing. If you have any advice for aspiring writers such as Jonathan and myself who have taken an inordinate amount of years not to finish our respective stories, sure, what would be like a piece of advice that's not, well, just do it? Because I know I should just do it. I can't. Yeah. But what would be some sort of inspirational thing for us to help us bunker down and get some discipline and finish our stories?
Sure. So I'll give you some of the advice that I have a writing coach, and I don't even think he realizes he's my writing coach. He's just been so influential. I ask him a bunch of questions and he answers any question I ask. But he gave me some really good advice early on. And I'm going to couple of the pieces of advice into one piece of advice. And that is, first and foremost, one of the things he said is in our class, because I took a class from him and then I've been in communication with him since. He said, if there's a story in the universe that exists that doesn't actually exist on paper, but it lives in your head, then you're the one that's meant to write it. He also said, in order to write a book, the first thing you have to do is write a book. And at first when he said that, I was like, okay, that makes sense, but like, it's like a Yoda saying, right? Like, and so he said, but what I mean is your first manuscript is probably going to be trash. You're probably going to have to make lots of edits. You're going to probably have to make lots of changes. Don't make it perfect in the first draft. Just sit down and get it out of your head and onto paper, right? And so at the end of the day, that is the biggest piece of advice I would give to new authors is let's make sure that you're getting it out of your head onto paper. It's going to be trash. Let editing help with that, right? It doesn't need to be perfect in the first go.
All right. So we are at time here and I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to make sure that I ask you where can people find you? And if you want to plug your next book, yeah, we can end with that.
So certainly you can buy my book on Amazon. So that's certainly a way to go about doing it. I would say please follow me on social media, Evan_Kidwell_author. And on Facebook, I'm Evan Kidwell author, right? I'm trying to keep abreast of, letting people know what's happening with my books and what's coming and all of that fun stuff in those platforms. And then the other thing I would say is certainly join my newsletter. I haven't technically started my newsletter yet, but if you do, you get a free gift from me if you go to TimaeusSpark.com. And then the other thing I would say is for quick plug for book 2, I already have a title in my mind for book 2. It's going to be Timaeus Spark and the Fragmented Protection. I'm working on it now. I'm hoping to have it out by January of this next year here. So, definitely follow along and go get your books and please vote.
Very cool. Well, Evan, it was an absolute delight to meet you. I think just personally for me, Slava, and as the team, I can speak for them, I think. It was great to meet you. You're a wonderful host. Nope, I'm the wonderful host. You're a wonderful guest, and we hope to have you back when your second book comes out.
Awesome.
Talk it up.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.